Shalom and welcome to another Petachamo podcast from Bay Abidan teaching Noahide Judaism for Messianic people. It is Tuesday, the 1st of July 2025, and today we're going to be talking about Jesus for Messianic Noahides. So who is Jesus for Messianic Noahides? How can a Noahide believe in Jesus? Hopefully we'll cover this. Fundamentally, the first answer to the question, really, to get it across immediately, the answer is Sar Hapanim, the Prince of the Presence. The Prince of the Presence, Sar Hapanim, is the heavenly priest, the one who goes behind the veil and offers incense in the heavenly tabernacle before the face of God. Hence, he's called the Prince of the Face, Prince of Presence. Sar Hapanim. That's the quick answer. But to explain that in more deep detail is what we hope to be going through today. I should also point out another thing. To deny the existence of the Prince of the Presence, of Sar Hapanim, in Judaism, in Orthodox Judaism, to deny it, to belittle it, to diminish it in any way whatsoever, is a sin called kitzutz netiot. So if you come across any so-called Jews or Noahides who don't give Sar Hapanim due respect, then those people are guilty of kitzutz netiot. So I should explain a little bit more about kitzutz netiot as well. Kitzutz netiot is a sin which is as grave and as serious as idolatry. It is the sort of opposite end of idolatry, though. Idolatry is when you attribute divine sort of status to something which is created. That is the definition of idolatry. A created object, a person who has been created, anything which is maybe inanimate, anything which does not come from the heavenly realm, and you attribute it a divine status, that is the definition of idolatry. Now, kitzutz netiot is kind of like the opposite direction of that. Kitzutz netiot is when you diminish the divine status of one of God's attributes or manifestations, something which comes directly from God. For example, this blaspheming the Holy Spirit. It's basically the sin of blaspheming the Holy Spirit, if you want to put it that way. The Holy Spirit is a power which comes from Hashem into the creation, and the manifestations of the Holy Spirit, which is Ruach HaKodesh in Hebrew, the pools, if you like, where Holy Spirit sort of forms into a pool and condenses and becomes manifest in a physical way, are the manifestations. And to deny those is the sin kitzutz netiot. It's basically blaspheming the Holy Spirit. So anybody who decides to dismiss, ignore, hide from, shrug off one of these manifestations or an encounter with any of these manifestations is guilty of this sin and becomes an apostate from Judaism. And the story which we use to help people understand this best is the story of the Pardesh, the paradise, which has it's got four people in this. Four people went into the garden, they say, and those were Rabbi Akiva, Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, and Acher. Those four went into the Pardesh, into the garden, into paradise, and a different fate came for each of them. So Akiva came out no problem, had nothing wrong with him. Acher came out as apostate. Ben Azai went mad, and Ben Zoma died. That's the basic story here. I'm going to put it on so you can read this for yourselves. I'm going to put share on the screen here just so you can see how easily accessible this story is. It's very fundamental in Judaism. It should be on the screen now. This is the Wikipedia entry, the Pardesh legend. They've translated as the orchard here. So the four characters that we focus on are mentioned there. Let's just find a zoom on the screen. Yeah, so there we go. One looked and died. One looked and was harmed. One looked and cut down trees. And when one went up in peace and went down in peace. So when you say the one looked and was harmed, this means meant mad. And one looked and died, obviously, is straightforward. And one looked and cut down trees, and that's the one we're talking about here. Acher, cut down trees, is kitzutz netiot. So it refers to Acher, and its simple interpretation is became an apostate, turned away from Judaism, and became a heathen, became a non-believer. Acher. So he looked and he committed the sin of kitzutz netiot. Whereas Akiva, we can say that belief in Sar HaPanim in the correct way is attributed to Akiva. Rabbi Akiva understood exactly who the Messiah was after, of course, he had repented from believing that Bar Kochba was the Messiah. Rabbi Akiva got the point. This is something which is that's what this means. He went up in peace and he came down in peace. This is something which is overlooked in Judaism an awful lot. They tend to think about Rabbi Akiva, who was the Messiah for Rabbi Akiva, and they say Bar Kochba. That's it, end of the story. But they always forget that, no, in the end, Rabbi Akiva understood who the Messiah was. He went up into Pardesh, into the orchard, and he came down. He went up in peace and he came down in peace. He understood it all. He got the point. Whereas Akiva went up and he cut down trees. So what's the difference between them? What happens? They go up into the heavenly realm, and they have a vision of the Messiah seated on the throne in heaven. They see God's representative, God's manifestation, seated on the throne in heaven. When they have this vision, it's too much for one of them. He just instantly dies. Another one can't understand what's going on and goes mad. Akiva is at peace with it, and he comes down in peace, and he teaches the correct Judaism, and we get the view correctly through his school. And Acher goes up and sees the one seated on the throne, and he goes through this process of rationalizing, trying to understand what it is he's seen. And the first thing he says is, hold on a second. Nobody can see God and live, yet I can see God seated on the throne, and nothing is happening to me. Okay, and also when he came down, he's thinking, well, maybe I'll die now, but no, nothing's happening. He's fine, and so this causes a problem. And number two, he says, clearly this one seated on the throne is God, because no one can sit in heaven except God. Only God can be seated in heaven. So he's got these two fundamental axioms, if you like, but his reasoning goes wrong. The fundamental axioms is nobody can see God and live, and the second axiom is nobody sits on the throne except God. And the third fact, which causes the trouble for him, is I have seen the one seated on the throne, and yet I live. Therefore, what's going on? So his summary of the situation is that there must be two powers in heaven, two gods in heaven. And that's where he becomes a pagan, a heathen. One God that you can't see, and another God that you can see seated on the throne. And so there are two powers in heaven. And the next step from this is when the one seated on the throne is the Messiah, Sar HaPanim, the one that Noahides believe is Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus of Nazareth must be Sar HaPanim, because there is only one. This is fundamental in Judaism. There is only one who sits on the throne, who we can see. That is Sar HaPanim. He is the soul of the Messiah, the pre-existent Messiah. He is, and there is no other way to see that. And yet we have no king but God. So he is also God, at least in some sense, which humans, as far as humans are concerned, we wouldn't regard him as just an angel, what we call one of the Nifradim, we would regard him as one of the Netiot. This is the express manifestations of God. Okay, so the visible, tangible, physical manifestations of God. But for the sake of Acher, this visible, tangible, physical manifestation of God must come down from heaven and receive punishment on earth, be whipped, for example, is given, and this is the only way that he can save Acher, people like Acher. What happens though is that the interpretation of this is this soul of the Messiah, which must suffer for the sake of the apostate, in order to bring the apostate back. This is Judaism. I'm not talking about Christianity. I know that Christianity is going to say, oh, well, it's like this is very similar, or this is the same thing. But I want to make it very clear the distinction. This is to try and explain who Jesus is and what is he for the Messianic Noahide. It's the same as who Sar HaPanim is for any Noahide and any Jew. The very simple explanation is that Jesus is Sar HaPanim. Obviously, if you are a Noahide, if you're practicing Judaism, the description of Jesus fits Sar HaPanim. Okay. But then you need to know who is Sar HaPanim in Judaism and for every other Noahide as well. So to reduce him then and say he is not an express manifestation of Hashem, he's just an angel. He's just an angel. He's one of the Nifradim, for example, is also the sin of Acher. Instead of recognizing Sar HaPanim as God's express manifestation, the physical presence of the Lord, the visible, tangible presence of God, instead of recognizing that is what Sar HaPanim is, because he came down and took the punishment for the sins of people like Acher, you end up then diminishing him and saying, oh, he's just an angel, he's one of the Nifradim. There is no such thing as Netiot. And that is Kitzutz Netiot. You end up cutting down the concept of Netiot. So either way, you've missed the concept of Netiot. If you say there are two powers, then you've become a polytheist. You've got two gods. You're not a monotheist anymore. You're a polytheist. Okay? This is not to do with Trinitarianism or binitarianism. You're not in binitarianism. You're a polytheist. You believe in two gods. So that's Kitzutz Netiot. You haven't understood Netiot. You've cut down the Netiot. If you then shift your position and say, oh no, he's just a Nifrad. He's just one of the Nifradim. He was a naughty angel. He shouldn't have sat down in heaven and he got punished for it. Then you're also guilty of Kitzutz Netiot. You've also cut down the trees. You've also cut down the Netiot. So the Netiot must not be cut down. The Netiot, and why is it a plural? Because this particular angel is a plurality. And that's where you can get the idea of Trinity from. There is at least three aspects, at the very least, to the Netiot. The Netiot is at least three. And yet is also one. So there's your Trinitarian sort of explanation. So could also sort not just who is Jesus for Messianic Noahides, but what is the Trinity for Messianic Noahides? And the only Trinity you're allowed for Messianic Noahides would be the Trinity of Netiot. He is the Trinity. He is the Trinity. There are three aspects to him. But to cut him down, and I say he's one at the end of the day, he is one, but there are three aspects to him. To cut him down, to dismiss him, to misunderstand him, to cut him out of the picture, to shrug him off, to ignore him, to misunderstand him is the sin of Kitzutz Netiot, which is the opposite side of the coin of idolatry. It is idolatry itself. That is the same thing. So it's equal to idolatry, but it's in the opposite direction. Now, no Jew, no Noahide is allowed to commit the sin of idolatry. They have to avoid this at all costs. But as we say, there's two sides to it. One is very simple pagan idolatry, where you elevate created objects to the same divine status as Hashem. And the other side of it, which is equal, is to ignore the divine attributes of Hashem, misunderstand them, cut them out of the picture, which is Kitzutz Netiyot. It's absolutely fundamental not to do this. You must not go to make it an error to the left nor to the right. You have to go straight down the middle. And if you don't go straight down the middle, it's not Judaism, and you're a wicked Noahide or a wicked Jew who needs to repent. You're basically Acher. You become Acher. You have to go straight down the middle. That's straightforward. That is Judaism. And if you don't go straight down the middle, then you are Acher. So it's not an easy path to walk, but you must focus on and know and study and recognize the Netiyot and the role of the Netiyot. And you must not confuse the nature of the Netiyot with a created being. If you say that the Netiyot is created, then you're also in trouble, because that would be raising a creation to the same level as the Netiyot. So it is neither created and nor is it separate from Hashem. It is a direct extension of Hashem into the creation. That's the correct way of understanding it. If you miss that, then you're in serious trouble in Judaism. So I hope I've managed to outline the nature of Netiyot, Sar HaPanim, and the importance of Netiyot Sar HaPanim in Judaism. There are a couple of questions from the comments there. I'll just remind people that you can join me in the studio if you want to express your opinions. You just click on that link. You can switch your camera on or off. It's up to you. You can have a picture up there if you like, and you can make sure you've got your microphone switched on. And you can come into the studio and push back on anything I have to say. Now, even if you decide to behave like an idiot, we do have some come on. We had one the other day. I won't stop you from behaving like an idiot. You will behave until the end of your tether. Okay. But be careful, because this could infect, behaving like an idiot in public. It's easy to identify who you really are. And it could affect your life, your work, your reputation in your everyday life. But if you do request me to remove it, I will do so. And if you ask humbly, of course I will. If you end up making a fool of yourself, but I hope that nobody will make a fool of themselves, and we could have a proper conversation. Just letting you know that you do put yourself, you do expose yourself, and you do put yourself at some kind of risk if you behave like an idiot on a live show, which is broadcast and recorded, and the recording stays up here. Reference to the King of the Earth 21 yesterday, King of the Earth 21, who did exactly that. So don't make the same mistakes. But if you want to push back on what I'm saying, that's totally fine. The purpose is not for you to use the platform as a podium to preach your gospel, your message to the world. The purpose is for you to come on and to discuss what it is that I'm talking about. It's my podium, my platform. I'm pushing and preaching this message to the world. But you're welcome to come on. You don't get a chance to do this with other preachers. You're welcome to come on and push back and say, well, what is it do you mean? Who is this Netiyot? Where do you get the ideas from? What is it all about? Why haven't I heard about it? And I can explain all these things to you, answer those questions, for example. The Netiyot obviously is mentioned in the Pardes legend, which is part of the Judaic tradition, Talmud. You've got many references throughout Judaism to this. Any kind of reference where Sar HaPanim has appeared, or there are physical manifestations, visible appearances of Hashem described in the Bible, that is a reference to Sar HaPanim. Whenever you have, or the Netiyot, I should say, and wherever you have a discussion of a rabbi going up into heaven and having a discussion with the Messiah before the Messiah comes, that's an example of Netiot. When it talks about the Spirit of God who hovered over the waters before the creation, and they say this is the soul of the Messiah, that's the Netiot right there. We have people like Rabbeinu Bahya who have gone into great depth and gone to great lengths explaining the nature of Sar HaPanim, and others, of course, in their commentaries on the Tanakh, especially on the Torah, especially on Exodus, where Hashem says, I'm going to send my angel ahead of you. Be sure to do everything he tells you. Of course, my name is in him. And those, wherever you've got that sort of passage in the Torah, the commentaries on that passage are, wherever the commentaries are on that passage, they're always talking and discussing Netiot. So he's fundamental. Netiot is fundamental. Sar HaPanim is fundamental to Judaism. Now, there are two sides which are going to push back generally on this. One side is going to push back, and I should put the link there, which is in the chat there, with a star. I'll star it so you hopefully can see it, and you can just click on that link if you want to join me in the studio. I hope that some people will, if they have questions about this. For example, we have Jaeger, who is typically misunderstanding from an uneducated Christian point of view, needs to have more education there. Come in, push back on me if you want. He says this and he says that. It's really kind of beside the point, as if we don't believe in these things. Messianic Noahides believe, obviously, in 1 Corinthians 15, 1-4, and of course believe in Ephesians 1:7. You know, there's no contradiction there. Of course, we believe in Ephesians 2:8-9. There's nothing wrong with that. There's obviously straightforward. It's not harming or damaging a position at all whatsoever. And you have also got double clack says, but there's only one earth. Is there only one earthly Messiah? Do all Messianic Noahides believe it is Jesus who is coming back, or another? Well, the name of Sar HaPanim is Jesus. It's Yeshua, Yeshua. He has many names, but Yeshua is one of his names. So he is called Yeshua. So the Messianic Noahide looks at the life of Jesus of Nazareth and says, who was this guy? Who was this rabbi? And in fact, whenever there is a founder of a yeshiva, whenever a rabbi establishes a yeshiva, establishes a school of thought, the members of that school who are most devout, the most devout members of that school, will regard the founder of their yeshiva as an appearance of Sar HaPanim. And there are plenty of discussions of that in the Talmud, where there are different yeshivot, members of different yeshivot are discussing who is the Messiah, and each of them is saying, basically, the founder of my yeshiva was the Messiah. And all of them are correct. There's not a problem for them to be correct. It doesn't mean that they necessarily were accurate, but in Judaism, it's totally correct for you to say that the founder of your yeshiva is Sar HaPanim, is the Messiah. There's no sin in that at all whatsoever. So to regard Jesus of Nazareth as the Sar HaPanim, as an appearance of Sar HaPanim, is completely correct in Judaism. If you love your yeshiva, if you love the founder of your yeshiva, you're completely justified in saying that I think my Rebbe, the founder of my yeshiva, I think he is the Messiah. He was the appearance of Sar HaPanim. That is completely justified. You might still be wrong, but it's completely justified. And so for Messianic Noahides, this is the correct Judaic way to regard Jesus of Nazareth as the Messiah. This is the correct way within the folds of Orthodox Judaism. This is not Messianic Judaism, this is Orthodox Judaism. I'm not trying to express or explain things from a Messianic Judaic point of view, or from a Christian point of view, or from an Islamic point of view. I couldn't care less, not bothered, and not interested in those points of view. What I'm interested in is helping people understand how to view Jesus of Nazareth as the Messiah from Judaism, the only religion mentioned in the Bible, specifically also named in the New Testament. So that is obviously an important religion. That is the religion that the Messiah chose to come in, whether you believe that's Jesus of Nazareth or not. Judaism is the religion that the Messiah comes in. He doesn't come in a different religion. He comes in this religion. If he came in a different religion, he wouldn't be called Mashiach. He would be called something else. But to be Messiah, it is only this religion which matters. Judaism, no other religion matters. You want to call him something else entirely, then that's okay. As long if it's not got any relationship to Judaism, you can call him whatever you want, and he can come in any pagan religion you like, and you give him any title you like. But it's not Judaism, and so therefore it's not relevant to trying to identify Jesus of Nazareth. You could view Jesus of Nazareth as a philosopher who came in Judaism, who was an apostate from Judaism, and he didn't like Judaism, and he tried to start a new philosophy. And there are plenty of Jews you can compare him to. Spinoza would be an example of that sort of person who came in Judaism, who had a philosophy which was, contrary to Sephardic Judaism. He was regarded as apostate by the Sephardic Jews. And he couldn't care less. He was only interested in his particular getting his point across. Okay, so that is completely possible to view him in that sense. But then he wouldn't be. And you could say, and that's what Judaism needed. They needed to have a philosopher who came on and gave a different point of view and everything. And that's the only kind of Messiah that Judaism is ever going to get. For example, a very, very physical interpretation of the situation, maybe similar to Islam, where you are basically saying that the Messiah is a human being who came along as a philosopher, tried to reform Judaism. Judaism missed the point. Okay, you can say that, but to call him Messiah in that case, if you're saying he's just a human philosopher, apostate from Judaism, who created tried to create a new approach to ethics, etc., and he was just a guy, and you say he was Messiah, then you're a blasphemer, you're idolater. If you don't call him Messiah, that's totally acceptable, that's totally fine. But as soon as you start calling him Messiah, then you're in trouble, because Messiah is netiot. And if you assume netiot was just a guy, just a bloke, just a human, just a created being who did all that, then you're in serious trouble, because you created the sin of kitzutz netiot. Therefore, you're equally as guilty as an idolater. So, it brings us to another point. I say, who is Jesus for Messianic Noahides? We talked about the Christian aspect, and now we've got to talk about the Islamic aspect. When Muslims talk about Jesus as just a guy, that would be totally fine if they were not using the word al-Masih for him, the Messiah. If they were not calling him the Messiah, it would be totally acceptable to say he was just a guy, he came along, and we think he was a prophet who basically reformed Judaism, tried to teach new ethics, new philosophy, new approach, and the Jews missed the point. That would be acceptable. It's okay, fine, you're entitled to your opinion. Except that they call him Messiah. And Messiah is only netiot. And if you are then saying this human is netiot, then you've raised the created being to the level of divine status. And that is, by definition, that is shirk, that is idolatry. That is pure, simple avodah zarah idolatry, the idolatry of the nations. So ironically, while Muslims might think that they are free from idolatry and better than Christians, because they've raised a human, because they don't claim that the human is at divine status, but he is still nevertheless the Messiah. They've made the same mistake. Messiah is divine. That is absolutely true. And the only Jews who don't recognize that Messiah is divine are Karaites and Sadducees and secular Jews and apostate Jews. And there are millions and millions of all of these. When you put them all together, there's millions of them. Judaism, though, says that Messiah was the Spirit of God who hovered over the waters in the beginning of creation. That is Judaic teaching. That is our doctrine. That is our position. Anybody who says otherwise has already committed the sin of kitzutz netiot and are apostate, outside of the folds of Judaism. So they cannot do that without committing the sin of kitzutz netiot. Messiah is divine. Messiah is the manifestation of the King, the God, the King in our creation. His name, God's name, the physical name that we call upon, the presence of the name amongst us is Messiah. And he will rule us one day. He will live with us one day. That's what's going to happen in Olam Haba. In the world to come, he will live with us. We will be his people. He will be our God, and he will be with us, amongst us. This is our belief. He used to be with us, living in the temple in Jerusalem, in the first temple. He used to be with us, living in the tabernacle in the wilderness. We have had that time before, and that time will come again. He will live us. He will be our God, and we'll be his people. This is absolutely the case. This is Judaism. So as soon as you call someone Messiah, the Messiah, and you are meaning a promised Messiah, okay, Messiah ben David, Messiah ben Joseph, Messiah ben Aaron, as soon as you are meaning one of these three aspects of Netiyot, okay, you are meaning Netiyot. The Netiyot has three aspects. One aspect is Messiah ben Joseph, one aspect is Messiah ben David, and the other aspect is Messiah ben Aaron. These are the three aspects of Netiyot. So when you talk about the Messiah, you're talking about one of these things, unless you're just simply talking about the king. Okay, when you're simply talking about the king, then what you're talking about, a human king like Saul or David or Solomon or any of the kings of Israel or any of the kings of Judah, you're talking about a temporary replacement for Netiyot. This is something which we were expressly warned against and prohibited to us, and said this is actually our hearts going hard, going cold for God, and we were criticized. And even Samuel, even the prophet Samuel says, in the book of Samuel, it says, we were criticized at the very beginning, from the outset, for making this grave mistake of taking a human as king instead of the true Messiah. So you do get the use of the term Messiah for human kings, for earthly kings. For earthly priests, we do get priests and kings being referred to as Messiah. Even foreign kings, like Cyrus the Great, being referred to as Messiah. But Cyrus the Great is actually more special because he was a Noahide. And a Noahide who encourages Jews to perform mitzvot, for example, to observe Sabbath and to worship on the Sabbath, which is what Cyrus did when he said, go back to the land of Israel and rebuild the temple. He gave them permission and money to do so in the satrapy of the land of Israel, which belonged to his empire. He then takes on a status which is comparable to being the high priest, the anointed high priest, but he is outside of the priesthood. So what priesthood does he belong to? Because when Noahide does that, they become as holy as the Kohen Gadol in the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur, the high priest in the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur. They get this anointed priesthood status. But what anointed priesthood status could it possibly be? They don't belong to the priesthood of Aaron. Cyrus the Great was definitely not a descendant of Aaron. He didn't belong to the priesthood of Aaron. He was a Persian. He was a non-Jew. He was a Gentile. So what priesthood did he belong to? Which priesthood does he get involved in to suddenly get the title Messiah? Well, he joins the priesthood of the Messiah, the priesthood of Netiyot. And everybody who joins the priesthood of the Netiyot, of the Messiah, and carries out his work is also called a Messiah. Not in the same way that we would call just any king as anointed in that sense. No, he would be called the Messiah or one of the Messiah's servants. The servants of the Messiah are also extensions of the Messiah. They become extensions of the Messiah himself too. So Cyrus is a perfect example of a human who becomes an extension of the Messiah when the Messiah himself is already an extension of God. And any human who does that, any Noahide, who encourages a Jew to keep a mitzvah, like observing Sabbath, worshipping on the Sabbath, which is specifically what the mitzvah which Cyrus encouraged the Jews to do, gains admittance into that priesthood, which makes them equal, if not greater than, the high priest of Israel in the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur. You get that status. Now, that status is very, very special. That status is something which is not available to every Jew. Not every Jew can get that condition, but any Noahide can. Anybody from any nation can get that condition, but not every Jew. You have to be, in order to attain that position, first of all, you have to have a temple. Second of all, you have to be of the lineage of Aaron. Third of all, your yikus has to be completely undamaged. In the first yikus, in yikus Aleph, category Aleph, Cohen category, you must not have any question on your yikus with regards to your status as a Cohen. And then finally, you also have to be chosen to be serving as high priest at that time as well. So there are a lot of conditions which a Jew has to meet in order to be able to have that status. And those conditions don't exist anymore. We don't have active serving high priests in the temple. Those conditions don't exist. So in other words, there is no Jew in the world who can attain that status. And yet, every Noahide can attain that status if they only go down this path of encouraging Jews to observe the mitzvah of keeping the Sabbath. All they have to do is encourage Jews to keep the Sabbath, and they have entered into that priesthood. This is the priesthood of Melchizedek. This is the Melchizedek priesthood. That's all you have to do. And you become little messiahs alongside the Messiah Netiot, whose work you are continuing, whose work you are doing, which is basically to deliver the children of Israel from bondage. In this case, from the bondage of sin, from the bondage of disregard for the Sabbath, and you're bringing them back into the promised land. In this case, the promised land of the Sabbath. You're bringing them back into the Sabbath. By doing so, you assist the Messiah in his work, and you become extensions of the Messiah. So, Netiot is divine, is the divine king, and those who do his work as his faithful servants become the extensions of him. In the same way that Eliezer went as the servant of Abraham to go and find a wife for Isaac, when he spoke and the work he did was as Abraham himself. He had all the authority and the control of the situation as Abraham himself. He became a physical extension of Abraham when he went to the north to find the wife Rebecca for Abraham's son Isaac. He was the extension of Abraham. And that is the faithful servant example. Eliezer becomes a sort of a type, a shadow, a foreshadow of the Messianic people, of the, if you like, the Meshichim, which is basically would be translated as Christians, except Christian has taken on too many connotations to no longer be simple in its translation of Meshichi. So, but you become the proper Meshichim. You become Meshichi. You become Christian. Mashiach is Christ, and Meshichi is a Christian, if you like. And Meshichim is Christians, if you like. But these are not simple words, because the word Christian has got so much baggage with it. It's not possible to use that word anymore. So we have to go back to use the Hebrew word instead. So they become the Meshichim. Okay? They become the extensions of the Messiah. And Eliezer is the perfect example, the foreshadow of that. Abraham also being a symbol of the Messiah himself in this case. Eliezer does the work faithfully of his master, Abraham, and becomes an extension of Abraham. That is what a Messianic Noahide should be, an extension of the Messiah Netiot. So, understanding Messiah Netiot is extremely important in Judaism and for every Noahide, but especially and particularly important for those who are calling themselves Messianic Noahides. And if they don't know this, if they don't grasp this, not only are they not Messianic Noahides, they're not Noahides at all, and they are not even Jews. They are apostate. They have committed the grave, unforgivable sin of Kitzutz Netiot. And I say unforgivable because if you die in that condition, you're damned. You must repent from Kitzutz Netiot in order to be forgiven. So you say, why do you call it unforgivable? And when we talk about being an unforgivable sin, we mean a sin which, when you die in that condition, you will not be rescued from damnation. You have to repent from this before you die in order to receive the mercy of God. God's mercy is infinite, and as soon as you call upon his mercy, it will be granted to you, because he is the most forgiving, most merciful. But if you don't call upon his mercy, if you do not ask for forgiveness, and you die in a condition of Kitzutz Netiot, in other words, if you don't recognize your sin, if you deny this, that you've committed the sin of Kitzutz Netiot, and you die in that condition, then you're doomed. There's no salvation for you, because that is the blaspheming of the Holy Spirit. Kitzutz Netiot. So it's major issue. Now I have some more comments here. So I answered that one for Double Clutch. Double Clutch had another question. As I said, it's be easier if you want to pop into the studio. As long as you are able to control yourselves, you can pop into the studio. The link is there in the chat. I'm welcoming anybody who wants to pop in. He says, in this question is slightly different, but is there only one earthly Messiah in Judaism? I see. Did all Messianic Noahides believe it is Jesus who is coming back, or another undefined Messiah figure, or Messiah type? I think it's not much different from the first question. I'm not sure if he got it, but he does have a comment further on, which I'll see if he does. So he says down here, I hope it's an indication that he has understood it. So he says, okay, so it's possible the word proto-Muslims during the beginning of Islam, they were probably still Christian, believed in many messiahs? No, it's absolutely impossible. I remember this said in a video, not sure if it was your video, it's certainly not mine, I would never say that. And then he says, so the Muslims don't believe the Messiah is divine. All right. If there are Muslims out there, like Sunni Muslims, I would say, I wouldn't go as far to talk about all Shia sects, but certainly Sunni Muslims, and not Sufis either. But the Sunni Muslims, non-Sufi Sunni Muslims, are definitely in trouble because they don't believe that Jesus of Nazareth is divine, and yet they call him Messiah. But the Messiah is divine. So it's the same as saying this human being is God. And they say, well, we didn't call him God, we called him Messiah. Yeah, but Messiah is God. So if you call a human being God, and I'm not talking about a divine manifestation, I'm talking about a human being, your local bus driver, you're talking about yourself. You say, I am God. And, my parents have conceived me, God, and my mother gave birth to me, God. Conceived in a normal, natural way, and you claim to be God. This is shirk, this is idolatry, this is avodah zarah, this is paganism. This is what the Roman emperors did. This is what the Persian Shahs did. This is what any of the pagan god kings have done in the past, which is not allowed. Judaism doesn't permit such a point of view. It is simple idolatry. That's what, Earth King 21 was trying to say yesterday. He was claiming himself to be God on the show. And because anybody who didn't worship him was therefore worshipping Satan or Lucifer. That's what he was trying to say. So that kind of mental illness is the illness of the pagans. The pagans are ready for that. they're ready to embrace that, even if they've read through the Bible and memorized the Bible, but their mentality is still pagan. Memorizing the Bible does nothing for them. It does absolutely nothing for them at all whatsoever. Knowing the phrase Messiah does nothing for them. It doesn't help them at all. They still think like pagans. Now, Muslims like to think that they are free from this pagan attitude. But their mistake is that they don't recognize the intensity of the word al-Masih, of the word Messiah, which they are using. They don't recognize the intensity of this word. So they claim, oh, he's just a guy, he's just a human. He had a miraculous birth, but he's 100% completely normal created being. And then they give him a divine title like Messiah. It's the same as saying, and he's God. It's exactly the same as saying this human being, this normal, regular, average human being is God. This rock is God. This stone is God. This tree is God. This leaf is God. This statue is God. This created object out of the material world is God. That is paganism. So by calling Jesus Messiah like that, without recognizing the definition of Messiah, they have committed the sin of idolatry there. Because they're saying a guy is God. A common guy like you and me. If they were to recognize that, wait a second, no, Jesus of Nazareth is not just a regular guy. He's actually, his flesh doesn't even come from this planet. His flesh was divine. He had divine flesh. He didn't just borrow some flesh from his mother and turn it into his flesh. He literally was a divine celestial being. Now, this is called, this is Anabaptist Christology. Anabaptists have got it right. They understand this. The Anabaptist Christology is the correct Judaic Christology. It is the correct Christology for all Messianic believers. They say, well, no, actually, Jesus of Nazareth was not of earthly flesh and blood. He was physical. He was real. You could see him, touch him, sit down and eat with him. He's like you and me in all intents and purposes, but there's the key word, like you and me. And that's a very, very important word. Little word, but so important. Like you and me. It's like this, but it's not this. Because if it was, you would say it is. He is human. No, but he was like a human. And that's the phrase used in the Bible to describe the Bar Anesh, the Son of Man. He's actually not called the Son of Man. He's called Kabar Anesh, like a Son of Man. One like a Son of Man. And this gets abbreviated into Son of Man, the Son of Man. But the Messiah as the Son of Man is the one like a Son of Man. And there's something different about him. What is that's different about him? Well, his flesh was celestial. He has celestial flesh. He has divine flesh and blood. Divine flesh and blood. Not exactly human, but like a human to all intents and purposes. But not exactly. That's the major difference. If you say, well, where does his flesh come from? And the answer would be, it came from Ein Sof. It came from the divine, directly from infinite light. He was a physical manifestation, a solid physical presence of light from light. If you say that, you've got it right. If you say, well, he was light from light and he had his mother's body as well, no, you've made a mistake in Judaism. That's why it's not possible for a Messianic Noahide to be a Diophysite. You can say that he had flesh from his mother, but you'll end up like a Eutychian, and that's okay for a Messianic Noahide. You can be Eutychian and say, well, but the flesh from his mother was just like clothing and was really irrelevant. The real flesh was underneath that surface level skin. His real flesh is all that matters to us. Then you're okay, but that's Eutychianism. Whereas you're okay from a Messianic Noahide point of view, from a Judaic point of view, but from the Christian point of view, you're a heretic called a Eutychian. So that's a problem for Christians. All those Eutychians are monophysites. They have a different concept, which is more like celestial flesh, and that is miaphysitism, and that's very slightly different from monophysitism, which is Eutychianism, very slightly different. You've got Miaphysitism. And with Miaphysitism, you are on the celestial flesh side of things, and so you're okay. Now, the problem is, as I'm saying, Muslims don't believe in this celestial flesh concept. If they believed in the celestial flesh concept and they called him Messiah, no sin. There's no sin. There's no idolatry there, and they haven't done kitzutz netiyat. There's no sin. And that's why I exclude the Sufis and the Shias, because maybe Sufis and some Shias, maybe they do regard Jesus as having celestial flesh. I certainly know that Alevis do. But with regards to Sunnis, then we have a problem, because they don't, unless they're Sufis, they don't believe in celestial flesh concept. So when they call Jesus a man, they mean a non-celestial flesh, common human being who was just miraculously born, but in the end of the day is like you and me. And they call him Messiah, they give him the divine title, they have committed idolatry. They might not treat him with respect, they might treat him with zero respect. It doesn't matter. They've given him the divine title, that means it's idolatry, and then they disrespect him. It means they're disrespecting the divine title, means that everything they show is a disrespect to him, is a disrespect towards God himself, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they're in serious, serious trouble. That's a really, really big problem. But then let's not pretend that the Christians aren't also doing the same thing when they say that there are two natures to Jesus, diophysitism. I'm not talking about those who are monophysites or miaphysites, but the diophysite Christians are committing the same sin as the Muslims, exactly the same sin. There's no distinction. But they're not compounding their sin by then disrespecting Jesus the way many Sunnis do. Okay, so there's one less sin, but the sin is the same when they say his flesh came from his mother's body, and they elevate that flesh to equal status alongside the creator. So they've done the same thing. They've taken a created object, a created thing, and they've elevated it to divine status. It's pure, simple idolatry and paganism. They haven't evolved out of the pagan position. Muslims are doing it by ignorance. Christians are doing it consciously, but both of them ending up committing the same sin. All right. So then he says, but the early Muslims took their caliphs as Messiah king types. Someone said in the video, and Jesus was just the first succession of Messiah types on earth. You ever heard this theory? All right, so this idea, double clutch, you've got so many questions, just click on the link and come in the studio. It's going to be much quicker and easier if you just click on the link, come in the studio and ask your questions here. It's going to be very, very quick. Typing them out is slow. Me waiting for you to type them out is slow. Just come in the studio and have a chat. I'm sure you're a rational, normal human being, so we won't have a conflict. I had two people come into the studio yesterday, and one was a lunatic, but the other one was a very rational, normal person. You must have heard the conversation if you're watching, that with the rational, normal person, we had a very long and straightforward discussion. Of course, I think the conversation with the lunatic was probably more entertaining for people, but nevertheless, I didn't try to humiliate that person at all. So you're welcome to pop in. The only person who's going to humiliate anyone is the guests themselves if they decide to behave in an inappropriate way. But what you're talking about right now, the idea of a succession of messiahs, Messiah king types, is what the Hasidic Jews have a belief in, when they believe that the Rebbe of their group is the current Messiah. He's a human being conceived in a normal way, and he's the Messiah for the current era, the current generation. And the earliest group which has this sort of Hasidic approach is the Nasra, the group called Nasra in the Quran. Now, that's not Christians. It's very, very wrong for people to imagine that this actually means Christians. But Jesus of Nazareth did come from that group. No, don't worry about it. And he says, I'll come at another time when I've got more knowledge. It's absolutely acceptable you come in when you don't have knowledge. You don't have to worry about your image of being somebody, oh, I'm afraid of showing myself to be somebody who's ignorant or something. Somebody who is accepting that they don't have a lot of knowledge on a topic is more interesting than somebody who thinks that they know everything about a topic. Waiting until you think you're strong enough to come on and you've got tons of knowledge is just an ego trip. That's all it is. Don't wait. Do it now when you are innocent and pure and free from that condition, because the more people know, the worse mistakes they're likely to make. It's not an easy job. Me too. The more we know, the more mistakes we're likely to make. So don't worry about that. Pop in. You can clarify your position more clearly in case I misread your message or it goes over my head or something like that. So you can make it clear to me and say, no, that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to get at this point. So, with regards to this question with successions of viceroys, there were sects that didn't regard Saul and David and Solomon and the succession of kings who come in that line. They didn't regard them as being substandard. They didn't regard them as substandard. They thought that they were perfect God kings and God's representatives and caliphs, and that there was no mistake in that. And this group of people were the people who read the Chronicles of Ezra rather than the whole Bible and understanding Judaism. They would just pick up Chronicles and think, oh yes, it's great. God's got his representatives, his viceroys on the earth, and these are the line of David. And then they would follow any descendant of David in that line in the generation that they lived in. And they were called the Nasara or the Netzarim originally because they followed the Netzar, the Netzri. The Netzar is the Netzar is the scion of the house of David. And when the scion of the house of David that they followed died, they moved on very quickly to another scion of the house of David. Now, the Messiah must come from the scions of the house of David. That's absolutely true. He has to be born from among the scions of the house of David. And so the Netzarim will follow him as the Messiah while he is alive. But as soon as he dies, the Netzarim will move on to another Messiah because they're not interested in a dead Messiah. They're looking for the current heir to the throne. They have a very earthly way, very secular way of looking at things. They're not going to hang around waiting for a Messiah to come back from the grave. They're going to move on very, very quickly. And if that person seems to be politically savvy and effective, then they'll follow him. And if that person seems to be, even though he's a scion, seems to be a bit spaced out, then they will think that he's a lunatic and they won't be interested in that particular scion. They're going to be looking for members of the house of David who are politically savvy and look like they might be powerful enough to lead an army. And that's the kind of Messiah they're looking for. And each person who they follow in each generation who fits those criteria is the Messiah, is the Caliph, is the Viceroy. And the Netzarim became called the Notzrim because they did that. There may have been many of them who followed Jesus of Nazareth, but as soon as Jesus of Nazareth was crucified and buried, and they hadn't personally witnessed the resurrection, they moved on and they followed another member of the house of David as the next Messiah. And when that person died, they moved and followed another, and another, and another, and another, and another. And they were the Notzrim, the Netzarim, the Judeo-Nazarenes, as Odon Fontaine calls them, not Christians as we understand them. They were not followers of Jesus of Nazareth. They were followers of the Scion from the house of David, who was alive in their particular generation. And the Hasidic Jews descend from them. Hasidic Judaism descends from that group. They always follow the dynasty of David, the one who sits on the throne of David, if you like, whether crowned or not. King without a crown doesn't matter. They follow the sign of the time. So that's what we're talking about when you're talking about the first in a succession of Messiah types on earth. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about the Netzarim. Okay, and Islam comes from that tradition, certainly, and the caliphs are very much in the same sense. So, referring to a caliph in Islam, you could also refer to any of the rebbes of a Hasidic dynasty as a caliph. They're all caliphs, just like there is a caliph today amongst the Ahmadi Muslims. They follow the caliphs as descended from, I think his name Ghulam Mirza Ahmed, and they have to follow his succession line, and they call him caliph. Likewise, in the Hasidic dynasties, they call the one who sits in the seat of the Messiah, they call him the Messiah. He's also a caliph in a sense. So they exist, but those people are all guilty of kitzutz netiot. They're all guilty of kitzutz netiot. Then he says, Muslims redefined the meaning of Messiah over time, maybe on purpose, or maybe they forgot the Jewish teachings by the time of the Abbasids, like you said before. Well, they may have redefined the meaning of Messiah over time, either one way or another, by forgetting. But we're not interested. There's a kind of an idiocy in taking a Judaic concept and then redefining it in your language and culture, and then applying your language and culture's definition to the Jewish people and saying this is what you had to believe. It's an imperialism. It's quite idiotic. It's an imperialism saying, well, we're going to take your Judaic concept, we're going to change your Judaic concept, we're going to keep the same word, we're going to change the concept, and we're going to project onto you our concept and say this is what you've got to believe. It's like, well, who are you to say so? Who are you to correct the Jewish concept of Messiah? What I'm presenting here in the show is the Judaic concept of Messiah, and explain that Messianic Noahides have to accept this Judaic concept of Messiah for Jesus of Nazareth if they want Jesus to be the Messiah. This is the concept they need to have concerning him. Whereas the Muslims if they did change the meaning over time, and I have come across some Indonesian or Malaysian Muslims who try to say the word Messiah means massager, and Jesus was just very good at doing massage, and that's how he used to heal people. I mean, that's just loony. You've taken the word from Judaism, Mashiach, and you've taken Mashiach and you made it into an Arabic word, Masih, and you're saying this word is not the same word as the Judaic concept, Mashiach. It's the Arabic word, Masih, and it means to massage. And then you're saying that Jesus was a massager and that the Jews were waiting for an amazing massager to come along. And then you're going to say that Saul was an amazing massager, and that David was an amazing massager, and that Solomon was an amazing massager. And it's really quite loony. It's absolutely a massive joke. It's hilarious to listen to people saying things like that, and that they actually believe themselves and think that they're serious. It's absolutely embarrassing for them, but entertaining for us to listen to them. Maybe they redefined the meaning over time, and maybe they did that on purpose to avoid the sin of kitzutz netiot, but that's not even avoiding the sin of kitzutz netiot. As long as they make a link between the concept of Masih and say that this is what the Jews were waiting for all the time, it's still blaspheming the Holy Spirit. It's still kitzutz netiot. It's still kitzutz netiot, because they are still saying that the thing that the Jews want as their king is just a massager. Wow. That's literally like saying the thing, it's exactly the same level as saying the thing that the Jews worship as God is just a massager. Wow. It's massive blasphemy. It's massive sin. It's absolute kitzutz netiot. You see, so they can't escape the problem of kitzutz netiot. But like I said, Christians are having trouble also when they say that his flesh was taken from Mary's body, and raising that flesh to the level of divine status is pure, simple paganism. So both sides have got a serious problem, which they are not escaping for in their current doctrinal positions. So the doctrinal position for the Messianic Noahide, whether you, as I said, I said in the show the other day when I recorded the show for Messianic Noahides, what is a Messianic Noahide? I said you can have any praxis you like, but it's a doctrinal morality. And the doctrinal morality is what you have to study and understand. You can be living the life looking like a Catholic or a Protestant, a Lutheran, a Calvinist, a Muslim, a Sunni, or a Shia. It doesn't matter what you look like on the outside, what everybody else thinks you are, because of the particular kind of temple that you go to, whether a mosque or a church. It doesn't matter. The important thing is, do you have the correct doctrinal morality? If you have the correct doctrinal morality, then you're a Noahide. You're a Messianic Noahide. If you have the wrong doctrinal morality, then you are not a Noahide. You've got to get the doctrine correct. It's not, praxis is not important for Noahides. Doctrine is correct. Praxis is only important for fellowshipping. And if there were a community of Noahides in one city, in one town, Messianic Noahides, who wanted to fellowship together, it could be very difficult because some of them may come from a Lutheran background, other from Calvinist background, other from a Sunni background or a Shia background, or some of them from formerly Messianic Jewish synagogues, and they would all want to come together and pray together. They would all have different praxis, and then they would all have to try and find out, well, what praxis can we do together? And that's why the Messianic Noahide community is difficult to hold together, because in physical sense, the praxis is different. There is no common praxis. That's what causes it difficult to come together. There can be a praxis, but it ends up looking somewhat Islamic. It looks somewhat Islamic. The praxis as defined in Judaism for such people would be, for example, when you come together, that you would have to wash, do some kind of symbolic ablution, at the very least have a fountain of water. You put your finger in it and then touch your head and your feet and your arms, just to symbolize that you've washed your head, your feet, and your arms, and therefore you're symbolically meeting the criteria of washing before you enter the place of worship. And then you would take the shoes from off your feet when you enter into the place of worship, because the place you are entering is holy ground. This is from the Bible as well. So again, it's just from this immediately. You go to the place of worship, you do this symbolic washing, and then you take your shoes off, or you take your shoes off and do the symbolic washing, and then you enter into the place. It looks very Islamic already, and you haven't even started to pray yet. You see what I mean? So if you were going to follow Messianic Noahide praxis, even just Noahide praxis, then you would end up starting to look quite Islamic. It would look very, very Islamic on the outside to other people, and people might think that you are Muslims. When you pray, you would do, it's a very good book which people should get, called The Pray as a Jew, to understand how to follow the prayers correctly. And to pray as a Jew, Noahides would do that. They would actually bow down and prostrate on the floor exactly the same way as Muslims do. So you go to this place, you take off your shoes, you wash your symbolically, you wash your head, your feet, and your arms. You go into the place to pray, and you bow down and prostrate. Now you're looking extremely Islamic. Now, see how the praxis for a Messianic Noahide, if you wanted to say, okay, let's leave behind whatever praxis we did, and let's now follow a pure path of Messianic Noahide. How should our praxis be for a Messianic Noahide? Bearing in mind that Messianic Noahides are not required to have a common praxis, but just to tick the boxes, just to fill out the form properly, how would it look if we did it according to, Kadat Fakadin, according to the way that it's supposed to have been done in the past? Well, it would start looking very Islamic. You would also have women would have to cover their heads when they pray. There you go. The women are wearing hijabs, but when the woman prays, she has to cover her head. The men would also have to cover their heads when they pray. Men and women have to cover their heads. So men would be having little skull caps, and women would be having headscarves. So you're again looking even more Islamic now when you've entered into the place of worship. And then how do you pray? What do Noahides pray? Noahides are encouraged to recite the Psalms. those are the prayers of the Noahides. And of course, for a Messianic Noahide, not only reciting Psalms, but also the Lord's Prayer, Avinu Shebeshamayim. You have to do that one as well. So you end up reciting Psalms. Can you recite the Psalms in English? Well, actually, no. You'd have to recite the Psalms in Hebrew, and you would also do the Shebeshamayim in Hebrew too. So you've got a group of people who are going to a place, taking off their shoes before they're going, doing some kind of symbolic wash, going in and reciting Semitic language, things which sound like poems in Semitic language with meter and rhyme and tempo and rhythm, and then bowing down and prostrating. And it looks like Islam, doesn't it? Well, absolutely. That's because Islam is coming from Messianic Noahide Judaism. It actually comes from that. That's why Muslims do the things they do. And if you go back a few hundred years, Christians used to do this too. In the modern day, the only Christians who still do this are what we call monastics, people who live, or the religious groups who still pray in this particular way. For example, religious orders like the orders of St. Francis of Assisi or the orders of Benedict, they still have little prayer mats, they still do ablutions, they still bow and prostrate, and they read the Psalms the same way as Christians always used to do for 2,000 years. But most Christians are so far removed from their roots, so divorced from their roots, they don't even know any of this anymore. They're far, far away from any of this. It's only the religious amongst the Christians and Muslims who are still practicing things that way. But like I said, all of this praxis is really not important. It's only important for the sake of fellowshipping. That's why a Messianic Noahide can have any praxis they like, as long as they are following the correct doctrinal morality. And there is one aspect of praxis which all Messianic Noahides must do, regardless of what they do with the rest of the community. Okay, they may go to the mosque as a Sunni or a Shia, they may go to the church as a Calvinist or a Lutheran or a Catholic or an Orthodox, but at the end of the day, when they come home on a Saturday night or a Sunday morning, they must do Havdalah. If they don't, then they're not doing the Zava'ah, which Jesus of Nazareth gave his disciples to do in memory of him when he said, "Do this in memory of me." You must do that. You can't allow other people to do that for you unless they're doing it correctly. You can, and to do it correctly means that at the end of the Sabbath, nobody eats or drinks anything until they have done this Havdalah ritual. And that means no matter how many days it takes, until sunset on Tuesday, they're not allowed to eat anything until they've done this. And if they do eat something, then they've missed the chance to do it. And once the sun has set on Tuesday, even if they didn't eat anything, it's too late. You've lost the chance to do it. So you have some time to do it, but you must do it. And you can't eat anything or drink anything until you've done that. There is a period of time when you say, well, I'm going to stop eating and drinking now. The next thing I eat and drink will be Havdalah, and I'm not going to do anything until that time. So if you're doing that after the end of the Sabbath on a Saturday, then the amount of time you're not going to eat or drink anything before you've done Havdalah will be literally less than 5 minutes. You just do the Havdalah, and then that's it. At the end of the Havdalah, you drink and you eat, and that's your Havdalah ceremony done. But if you're going to leave Havdalah until Sunday morning, then you're not going to eat or drink anything from midnight on Saturday night until after you've done Havdalah in the morning. So, and if you're not going to do Havdalah until Sunday afternoon, then you're going to be really uncomfortable all day because you end up fasting all day Sunday until Sunday afternoon when you've done the Havdalah. The point of the matter is you're not supposed to eat or drink anything until you have done the Havdalah. So that is one aspect of praxis which is universal for all Messianic Noahides. It's the fundamental, foundational praxis which every Noahide has to do, every Messianic Noahide has to do. In fact, every Noahide should be doing Havdalah too, but many of them don't do it. But Messianic Noahides can't get away with it and say, well, other Noahides don't do it. You shouldn't care less what other Noahides are doing, because other Noahides might all be guilty of Kitzutz Netiyot, as defined in this show, explained very clearly for everybody. And if they are guilty of kitzutz netiyot, you're not going to be using them as an example for what you should be doing. And how can you tell? Well, you ask them, who is Sar Hapanim? And if they say, I don't know, then they are guilty. Okay, they're not properly observing it. And there's no reason why you should copy them. And if they say, oh, he's just an angel, when you say, what kind of angel? Nifrad or Netiot, and they say, I don't know, then you don't follow them. And if they say Nifrad, because they know something, then you don't follow them. And if they say Netiot, and you say, what is Netiot? And he says, it's just an angel, then you don't follow them. All of these people are guilty of Kitzutz Netiot. And you don't fellowship with people who are guilty of Kitzutz Netiot. They're fakes, they're frauds. They may be calling themselves Noahides left, right, and center, but they are not Noahides if they don't know what Kitzutz Netiot is. At the end of the day, the Messianic Noahides Messiah should be the same as any other Noahides Messiah, that is Sar Hapanim. But other Noahides don't know who Sar Hapanim is because they're not bothered about something like that. Therefore, they're all guilty of Kitzutz Netiot. Therefore, Messianic Noahides have a higher level, higher standard, which they demand of all Noahides. And if other Noahides are not meeting those levels, that demand, then the other Noahides are simply not good enough for you to fellowship with. It might as well be fellowshipping with the other Sunnis, the other Shias, the other Catholics, the other Orthodox, the other Calvinists, the other Lutherans, whatever, because they're all wrong anyway, and there's no need to change, to swap one community for another community which is wrong just because they happen to be calling themselves Noahides. If they're wrong, they're wrong, and there's no point in joining them. Okay, so you stick together with your communities until you find a community of people who really can do it properly and correctly. That is the Bey Abadan, but the Bey Abadan is a scattered group of people from across the planet. And there's no physical fellowship between us because we are scattered all across the planet. I don't think you'll find even two families of Noahides, Messianic Noahides and Bey Abadan Noahides, in the same town that they can fellowship together. It's just not happening. So until Bey Abadan reaches that threshold, that's critical mass, where there's enough families coming together in one place, it's not going to be easy to fellowship. If it does reach that critical mass, then those people who are serious should then be moving house to the location of where most Bey Abadan people are, to live in community with them, so that they can learn the correct praxis. But that's a long way off right now. It's not going to be there right now. It's generally the case that Messianic Noahides throughout history have been individuals, because God doesn't pour out his spirit to absolutely everybody in the camp. He pours his spirit out onto the Sanhedrin, the 70 elders, and he pours his spirit out on the two more in the camp. Just two. One or two people here or there. And the rest of the people in the camp don't have the spirit poured out upon them. So that's why the Messianic Noahides are few and far between. Very few and far between. And if you do come across a group of people calling themselves Messianic Noahides, but their praxis is not the way I've described it, then they're not doing it. They're not doing what Messianic Noahides have to do. Messianic Noahides not only submitting their minds, but when they come together as a group to follow a praxis as well, then they would submit their bodies to copy the behaviors as their minds have been submitted to copy the behaviors. So you know, when you found the Messianic Noahides, they're going to look a bit like, in praxis, they're going to look a bit like Muslims. Maybe a lot like Muslims in praxis. But in doctrinal morality, they'll be very different. What is the doctrinal morality then? The doctrinal morality is that the first aspect is the morality. There are 7 laws of Noah, the Sharia of Noah, the Sheva Mitzvot. The laws of Noah are defined in Acts 15. They're very simple. There are 7 basic laws. Don't kill, don't steal, don't be sexually immoral, don't blaspheme, don't worship idols, don't eat strangled meat, is what it says in Acts 15. It says don't eat meat which hasn't been kashered, which hasn't been killed properly, unkashered meat. and don't be unjust. Make sure you keep the deen, follow the deen. The deen is the religion. And if you do all those, then you've got the morality. But the doctrinal morality means, why should I follow those? Why should I do that? Why is it important for me to do all this stuff? It's important to do all this stuff because you believe in the revelation of Mount Sinai. And if you don't know about the revelation of Mount Sinai and you're already doing all this stuff, then you are a Noahide, and you are still in a saving covenant. You're still under the covenant of Noah, and there's no need for you to even be listening to this channel, because it's just going to give you information which you don't need to know. Okay, it's absolutely irrelevant to you. It's only relevant for those of you who have broken one of the 7 laws of Noah, to know how to come back to being a Noahide after you've lost your position in the covenant. And that is through the belief in the revelation of Mount Sinai. So the correct doctrinal belief of doctrinal morality means I'm doing this morality specifically because it was revealed at Mount Sinai. And that's what Messianic Noahides have. And who revealed at Mount Sinai? What happened at Mount Sinai? There was a physical presence of Hashem, visible to all, tangible to all, at Mount Sinai. In other words, the Netiot came down and gave us this covenant. So it's absolutely fundamental for any Noahide to believe in the Netiot revelation at Mount Sinai, if the revelation of the Netiot at Mount Sinai. If they don't believe in the revelation of the Netiot at Mount Sinai, and if they're not doing these laws because the Netiot told us to do them at Mount Sinai, then they are not Noahides. They're not Noahides. I'm talking about the ones who claim to be believers in the Bible. They're not Noahides. As for those people who haven't heard of the Bible and are doing all those things, they're still Noahides. But those people who claim to know the Bible, they claim to believe in the Bible, and they don't believe in the revelation of the Netiot at Mount Sinai, and they don't do the 7 laws of Noah because the Netiot told us to do these things with the revelation of Mount Sinai when he revealed both the oral and written Torah. It means you must believe in the oral Torah and the written Torah, Taurat, plural, not just one Torah, Taurat, plural. You have to believe in the 2 Torahs, the oral and the written. And if you don't believe in the written and the oral Torah being revealed by the Netiot at Mount Sinai, and that's why you do the 7 laws of Noah, then you're not a Noahide. You're not a Bible-believing Noahide. You're not practicing Noahide Judaism. You might be a Noahide who doesn't know about Noahide Judaism just because you've never broken one of those laws, but you're certainly not practicing Noahide Judaism. You're not inside the folds of Judaism. Now let's have a look at this little double clutch. It's got some more questions there. After he says, I might come another time. He says, what does Bey Abidan mean? The house of Abidan. It's not Abidan, it's Abidan. Bey Abidan is, this is Aramaic. Bey is house of, and Abidan is Abidan. It's got many deep meanings, but it's also the angel of the Lord that the Lord sent to free us from the house of bondage, from the bondage in Egypt. The one who liberated us with mighty signs, brought us out with a mighty arm. That is Abidan, and it means the destroyer, and it is the divine attribute of justice, God's attribute of justice in divine manifestation. Okay, so we believe that Jesus of Nazareth is an appearance of that divine attribute. He actually looked like a human being. He looked like he was just a baby born and grew up amongst us as a rabbi. But actually, the whole time, he was actually God's manifestation, the Abidan, also known as Abaddon. But it can also mean other things as well. It can also mean, well, there's a lot of discussion about the etymology of Abidan. It's got lots of possible meanings, but that's the fundamental one. Now he has another question. Double Clutch says, using Messianic Noahide is your way of avoiding labels like Christian or Judaism, right? It's almost like saying believer. No, we're not avoiding Judaism at all whatsoever. This is absolutely 100% completely Orthodox Judaism. This is the path of Orthodox Judaism for non-Jews. This is a subsect or substrand of Orthodox Judaism under the umbrella of Orthodox Judaism. Noahide Judaism exists, and this is Noahide Judaism specifically for Messianic believers, people who come from any background but believe that Jesus of Nazareth is the Messiah. This is specifically universal Judaism for people who believe that Jesus was the Messiah. That's what it is. So you say it's your way of avoiding labels like Christian? Not at all. Christian has got a lot of baggage. If we called ourselves Christian, we would immediately be attacked by other Christians, people who call themselves Christians, and say, no, you're not Christians because you don't believe this, you don't believe that, you don't believe the other. And so, we don't even try to lay claim to that title. Mashiach, yes, that is the Hebrew term. Mashiach, yes, we can lay claim to that term, absolutely. Mashiachist, that's the Yiddish version. You can claim that same term exactly, no problem. But if we tried to use the term Christian, other people who call themselves Christians, and there's 2 billion of them, will beat us up for this and say, no, you can't. You're not a Christian. You're not Christian. They're very, very, very territorial about the use of that term. Okay, so we're not avoiding that label, but our interpretation of that would be so radically different from what people understand Christians to be that it's no help at all whatsoever to use that label. As regards to the label Judaism, we claim it, we lay claim to that, we embrace it. That is our religion. If somebody asks you, what's your religion? You say Judaism. So are you a Jew? No. It gets very difficult to explain to people who have concept of Judaism, thinking that believers in Judaism are all Jews, and you can't be a believer in Judaism unless you're a Jew. It gets difficult to explain that to them. Hence, you will use the term Noahide Judaism instead. And so what's Noahide Judaism? It's a universal aspect of Orthodox Judaism. It's Judaism for the nations. It's Judaism for people who are not Jews. It's Judaism for people who don't want to be Jews. That's the universal aspect of Judaism. People say, I didn't know there wasn't an aspect of Orthodox Judaism which was an all-embracing of all people, universal. And that's their problem. When you say, well, now you do. It's important for us to spread that message and make sure people do know that Judaism is not a racist religion which requires only people to be of a specific gene stock in order to be saved. That's ridiculous. It is outside of the concept of Judaism, and we want people to understand that's not Judaism. That's not what it's about. If you think that's what Judaism is about, then you've been badly misled by the internet. Because before the internet existed, people didn't even believe such a thing. It's only since the internet came into existence that people have started to believe such nonsense. That's a massive problem. That's not the reality of the situation. Judaism has always been a universal faith with a priesthood, just like Catholicism has got a priesthood and a laity. Judaism has always had a priesthood and a laity. The priests are called Jews, and the laity is the whole population of the planet. That's Judaism. And the message for the laity? Noahide Judaism. Keep the covenant of Noah. Be Noahides. That's the message of the Jewish priesthood to the laity, the Jewish laity. And when I'm saying Jewish priesthood, I'm not meaning the Cohens. I mean the nation of priests. Every Jew is called to be a priest preaching. Every Jew is called to be a preacher. Of what? Of Noahide Judaism. To all the nations. Okay, he's got another question. Why don't you just come on in? Just click the link. I'll give you the link here. Come on in. Don't be shy. Just click the link, pop into the studio, and very happy to chat with you. You've got a lot of intelligent questions. It's very good to have an intelligent person with intelligent questions. And we can go through so much more if you just click on the link and pop in. You don't have to show your camera. So he says this. Right, but what was the equivalent term to Messianic Noahides that people used in the 6th to 7th century? Arabia, for example, used in their language. Correct. Very good. The term for Noahides at that time was Hagerim. Hagerim. His excuses. I don't have a mic on my computer. I'm certain you've got a mobile phone, which has got. You're probably using your mobile phone right now. I'm certain you've got a phone which has got internet connection and it's got a microphone on it. This is a lame old excuse. I don't have a mic. Okay, fine. You don't have a mic. Everybody's got a mic these days. Anybody who's got a mobile phone has got a mic. I can send you the link to your phone. You can just open it up on your phone. You can click on it and you can speak through your phone and you've got a mic. So there's no excuse there. Okay, so I don't want to. So I'm afraid I don't want to. I'm shy. Just say it. It's okay. So I'm shy. Don't be shy. But what was the equivalent term? So Noahide is a recent term. It's only a few hundred years old and specifically developed by Jews in order to convey a concept which used to be expressed by the terms Hagerim. The thing is, Hagerim came to mean only Hagarines and came to have a very strong Islamic connotation. And so once Hagerim had been, which is a Hebrew term, in Aramaic it's Hagerin, or actually would be it would be slightly different in Aramaic. Hagerin probably actually, this because you've got a plural and a definite article, and the definite articles at the end. But it was Hagerim, and in Greek sort of corruption, it was Hagarin, and Muhajirin in Arabic. And the ger meant a pilgrim, a sojourner, somebody who had come to love the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who was a worshipper of God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who were grafted into the people of Israel as non-Jews. They were referred to in the Bible, for example, in the Ten Commandments. The commandment concerning Sabbath actually uses the phrase to refer to them. They refer to you as the strangers who are within your gates. That's the translation. The gerim who are within your gates. The ger who is within your gates. Okay, and that word ger had to have a different translation. At first, it was translated as proselyte until people started thinking of proselytes as just full converts to Judaism. It was also translated as God-fearers, as God worshippers. It was translated as pilgrims, as sojourners, meaning non-Jews who worshipped the God of Abraham. And then Hagerim became taken over with Islamic conquests. People started to regard only Muslims as being Hagerim, and this term started because, as I said, if you're practicing, if you're doing a Noahide praxis, you're going to look very much like Muslims. You're going to start ending up looking like Muslims. Actually, Muslims come from us, so that's why they look like us. They take off their shoes, they wash, they go in, they bow and they worship and prostrate, and they recite passages of poetry in a Semitic language. The men cover their heads with a cap, the women cover their heads when they pray with a scarf, and it looks like Islam. So Hagerim came to mean in people's minds, oh, you're just talking about kind of Muslims. No, this is the ancient religion of Abraham for the nations. This is the religion as it was practiced by the children of Noah all the way through history. But too bad, Hagerin came to mean a specific thing, and so we had to try and find a new word to express the same concept, the same old concept. And Noahide was the word we chose to express that concept. Noahide. It was a unique word, never been used by Christians, never been used by Muslims, and it conveyed all the full meaning of ger with a Judaic hegemony, which is what we really wanted. We want to be able to have the hegemony over this word so we can control the concept of what it means, so that it cannot be misunderstood by Christians or Muslims or anybody else who's going to think that it's some kind of Christian or Muslim. So that's what Messianic Noahide means. It means Hagerim of Jesus. Hagerim of Jesus. Or Hagarines of Jesus, if you want to put it that way. or Hagarenes of the Messiah, or the Messiah's Hagarenes, one way or another. Okay, so I've answered all your questions. Like I said, if you want to join me in the studio, just click on one of those links that we've put in there for you to click on in the chat. It's there available for you. I'll probably put it into the drop down description box as well, so that if you want to, you can click on that and come and join us in the studio in the description box if you have any questions. All right. So I think I've gone through a good explanation of Hagarene. Let's have a look at some other questions. We do have some other questions from some other people I saw. They popped up. Yeah, here's the question. D. Prout says, Shalom, Joe. There is such a wide range in Christianity that it almost feels like a type of Overton window. People are so far and ignorant from these things. They need to be pushed back to Judaism. Yes, that's true. But when you push them back to Judaism, there's a danger of Judaization. And Judaization is a massive sin in Judaism. We do not want non-Jews to Judaize. And to Judaize doesn't mean to convert to Orthodox Judaism and get circumcised and after you've learned how to keep all of the laws according to Judaism and to live as an Orthodox Jew. Judaization means to call yourself a Jew when you're not. That's what Judaization is. And even if you were going to get converted to Orthodox Judaism and observe all the laws correctly as Orthodox Jews do, we would say, why do that? Why would you want to do that? If you really understood Judaism, you wouldn't want to do that in the first place. You would only do that if you had some kind of compulsion that you had to do this, even though you knew that it was going to reduce your chances of holiness. Judaism says that a Noahide who encourages a Jew to observe the mitzvah of Shabbat, for example, to keep a Sabbath, to keep a holy Sabbath, that Noahide has the same level of holiness as the high priest in the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur. And yet no Jew can achieve that status today. So why would you give up that level of holiness for a lesser level of holiness, a level which can never be achieved by any Jew in the world today? It must be that the only people who would want to give up that would be people who don't understand Judaism. Therefore, there's no chance of encouraging such people to convert to Judaism, right? So we don't want people to convert to Judaism because of this reason. This is the reason why we don't want people to convert to Judaism. If they did want to convert to Judaism, it means they haven't understood Judaism. And so it's a good indication that that person is ignorant of Judaism and not worthy to convert to Judaism. In other words, if you're maybe more simple, if you think that giving up your level of holiness that you have a chance at as a Noahide is worth it to become a Jew, who has not a chance of achieving that level of holiness, then it means you haven't understood Judaism and you are not worthy of being accepted as a convert to Judaism. So the only other people who are going to come to Judaism, okay, by pushing like the Judaic Overton window, say, okay, Judaism, focus now. The only other people are the people who are going to start calling themselves Jews when they're not. Well, that's a synagogue of Satan, and we have too many of those. We had one on the channel the other day. Earth King 21 was saying, basically, he's a Levite, etc. He's a Judaizer. These Judaizers are loony. They haven't got a clue about Judaism. They don't know what Judaism is about. They're trying to work out Judaism from a sola scriptura point of view. It's not possible. You cannot understand Judaism from sola scriptura. You need the oral Torah to understand Judaism. So when you talk about the type of Overton window and people needing to be pulled back to Judaism, we really need to make clear that that Overton window that we're talking about is the oral Torah, rabbinical, scribal, pharisaical Judaism. Because if they don't see that, then they're not going to come back. In a sense, you're right. But only if we're talking about scribal, pharisaical Judaism. And he says, love the late night chats. He who has an ear, let him hear. Please, God, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Now, another question from Gold Roger says, your thesis seems to naturally explain the origins of Islam and early Christianity. of course. I wonder why modern scholars haven't been receptive to this. It's not that there aren't modern scholars who have been receptive to this. It's that their hands are tied in how they present it. For example, Crone and Cook, Patricia Crone and Cook, they wrote a book called Hagarism, and they tried to follow a sola scriptura way to try and get this across. And in doing so, they failed to actually encapsulate or encompass the true nature of Hagerim. They lost the point. They lost it. They were trying very, very hard to use a kind of a paper trail which would be impressive to the academic circles. They were using like Nag Hammadi, and they were using the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they were using ancient codices, and they were trying to reconstruct Hagarism, Hagarean Judaism, Judaism of Hagerim, Noahide Judaism, using only those sources without making reference to Judaism, because, believe it or not, there is excessive level of anti-Semitism towards anything too Jewish in the academic world. There was also this issue. They could have done it a different way. And I can say, well, why is there such excessive anti-Semitism in the academic world? And you can say it's not necessarily intentional, although in many cases it is. But what is the main thing which makes it not necessarily intentional is that the paper trail was destroyed by the Nazis during World War II. Nazis burnt so many books, so many texts, that the Jewish paper trail is gone. And then they like to boast and say, oh, you don't have a paper trail to the Jews. But there are paper trails, but the texts are so valuable and so inaccessible that it's difficult to do it unless you're a specialist in Jewish studies and you speak Hebrew, and you can go to the specialist universities, even have to do an internship or a professor, sort of a visiting professorship in a Hebrew university, for example, in Israel, to be able to have access to these things. And nobody wants to do that. That's not a very safe thing. It's such an unstable country. Really, it's a completely unstable country to go to. And if you're not going to go to that country to try and get access to these documents, you've got to become a rabbi. You've got to be over 40 years old. You've got to have at least 2 daughters, and these are the Judaic requirements that you have to have before you can go to a Jewish university outside of Israel, which is called a kollel, and study the same text. So it's such an inaccessible world that nobody is going to go through all that just to do it. If you're not a specialist in Jewish studies in the first place, if you're not a Jew who wants to study to be a rabbi, for example, and you go to one of these kollels, then you're not going to have access to the materials that you need to have access to research properly. And rightly so, because of what the Nazis did. The Jewish communities are very suspicious about letting anybody touch these texts which have survived, and to have them radiocarbon dated or whatever, because we're thinking that somebody's just going to burn and destroy, because that's what they've done for 2,000 years. So why should we trust that there's going to be anything any different? If they liked Judaism, they would make reference to it in their academic texts. They don't, so clearly they want to destroy the evidence. It's kind of a suspicion, a paranoia, but it's not paranoia without reason. It's paranoia with serious reasons behind it. This is what has happened in the past. There's no way we're going to trust non-Jews with this material anymore, unless you happen to be lucky enough to go to a secular university in Israel where they have access to a lot of this stuff. But then you've got to live over there and speak like a Zionist, walk like a duck, quack like a duck, in order to get full access to these things. So there is all that obstacle, there's all that hurdles to go to. Now, there is another way to do it. Which I'm not afraid of, but a lot of people are afraid of, and it's also not very popular in academic circles. The other way to do it is to use the non-Judaic sources, the Quran, the New Testament, and to show that there are references in both of these texts which are antithetical, if you like, against each other. They are the antithesis of each other. They are not from the same cultural milieu. They're from different cultural backgrounds. They are not from the same source. They're very, very different sources. And yet they both independently corroborate the oral Torah of Judaism. Okay, so you've got two independent witnesses corroborating the antiquity of Jewish oral Torah and showing that there is the existence of Jewish oral Torah goes back way beyond the paper trail. So you've got the Talmud, but all those rabbinical commentaries are actually, although those rabbinical commentaries only go back, say, 1,000 years, they are corroborated by the existence of the New Testament and the Quran. Now, how is that possible? There's only two possibilities. One, that Judaism was heavily influenced by Christianity and heavily influenced by Islam, which is actually an insane proposition because these three faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, are at odds with each other. And in the modern world, we sit down, we're having a discussion on the internet here, we're having a talk, and you still have highly charged individuals like that chap who came the other day on the show, filled with hatred, saying how all the Ashkenazi Jews have to be exterminated, blah, 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 because we're all Khazars. And that sort of is just an evidence to show that the hatred is still very real. You know, the lack of cooperation is still very real between Jews, Christians, and Muslims, even if there are enlightened circles and pockets on the internet where we can sit down and have a discussion, even amongst ourselves in these little tiny corners of the internet, tiny corners of society where we can have these discussions. There are people who are going to infiltrate and who are going to try and tear it all apart. And we had that with Bay Abadan, an awful lot of people trying to pop in and tear it all apart because the hatred is real. Nevertheless, you know, we try. But in the past, that hatred was even more real than it is today. Okay, it was even more tangible. It was even more palpable. It was having massive effects all the time. That hatred was very, very strong. Jews, Christians, Muslims did not get along. So the idea that Christians and Muslims, where they have a comment about something in Judaism, which is, or making a reference to something which Judaism also has, that the idea that it existed because we were all singing Kumbaya and holding hands in the olden days and Jews and Christian Muslims got along in three different groups is ridiculous. If Jews are doing something which is described in the New Testament and in the Quran, it's because Jews, and Jews say that we've been doing that for centuries, then the Quran and the New Testament are simply corroborating the fact that it's true. Jews really have been doing that for centuries. We've been doing it for a very, very long time. So this is another independent way of getting corroboration of the antiquity of Judaism. So now, why don't people want to do that? Because you are likely to lose your seat, your academic seat, if you try to use Christian and Islamic texts to corroborate Judaism. Don't ask me why. It's just that's some prejudice which exists. You're not allowed to use a Christian text or an Islamic text to corroborate the antiquity of Jewish oral Torah. Seems mad to me, but nobody wants to touch you with a barge pole if you say, let's do that. They're like, whoa. Because because the hatred is still real. Because Christians don't want their texts, this is Christian academics, don't want their texts to corroborate the antiquity of Judaism. Islamic academics don't want their texts to corroborate the antiquity of Judaism. Judaic academics don't want the antiquity of their tradition to be corroborated by Christian texts and Muslim texts. There's a hatred that goes on. And then you could say, what about the atheist academics? Well, the atheist academics don't want to corroborate the antiquity of religion, full stop. They want the whole thing to be fake. So if it's all young, so much the better. There's no secular atheist academic who's going to try and prove the antiquity of Judaism beyond the past 1,000 years. You see what I mean? So you've got huge bodies of political lobbies, people of particular persuasion, who don't want this sort of stuff to be investigated. So although, as you said, it naturally explains the origins of Islam and the early Christianity, that's why modern scholars haven't been receptive to it, because it rocks the boat. That's the very simple answer there. Okay, so Gold Roger says, I see where you're coming from. A lot of this feels like manufactured discontent and hatred to justify the capitalist order. Yeah, well, you're preaching to the choir. Amen, brother. That's absolutely the case, isn't it? But how far do we have to go with this capitalist order until the world realizes that this is really not the way forward? I think I was talking to somebody the other day and I was saying that everybody is being individualized and turned compartmentalized to make them into the perfect consumer. As you are isolated from each other, as you become more and more isolated from each other, you serve the capitalist order more and more. Things that you could have bought as a family, as a community, are now going to be bought many times more by individualists. If you want to buy some ingredients for a community of people, say a family, and cook a meal as a family, and everybody shares in that meal, that is not as much profit for those people selling the products as if you have each member of the family buying their own pre-prepared meal, right? So breaking down the family, breaking down communities, creating individualists, and destroying any sense of cohesion or solidarity amongst the people is extremely important for capitalism to increase their profits, simply because it means individuals are going to buy more to survive than families, communities, larger groups. A family, community, larger group can buy in bulk and prepare things for the community, and everybody can benefit at a lower cost. But individuals will always spend more to get the same amount out in the end. So it's worthwhile from the capitalist point of view to make sure that everybody becomes an individualist consumer. Now, how far can that go realistically? Let's imagine sometime in the future that absolutely all solidarity and sense of community between individuals has been broken down. There is no sense of community between anybody. Everybody is an individualist consumer now, serving the capitalist order. Let's imagine that was the case. Now that everybody is buying, that's the first year that happens across the face of the planet. Now that everybody is buying in that first year everything they need as an individual, the second year, the following year, every individual is not going to buy the same amount of stuff. Now, the capitalist model is that every year there has to be more profit than the previous year. There has to be continual growth. This year must make more profit than last year. You have to find a way to make more profit than last year. And if you individualize everybody, make everybody into a consumer, as we talk about in this hypothetical future, in the first year that's happened, everybody's bought everything that they need. The second year, they're only going to buy things now which no longer exist from the previous year. That means that the number of sales across the board will have gone down from the previous year. That will be the end of the capitalist model of profit this year being more than profit last year. And as the years progress, there'll be less and less bought. So eventually the only things that people will be really buying would be things which are designed to break, and food, which you need to replenish, nourishment. So you would be then the only way to try and make more and more profit would be to give you food which doesn't nourish you, so that you're continually hungry, so you continue buying more and more food which doesn't nourish you, and to sell you products which are continually breaking, so you have to buy them again tomorrow. So if you get to that point where you're continually hungry buying food as an individual which doesn't nourish you, and buying every product you buy breaks and you have to buy another one, you've still reached a point of like a critical point where it's not possible to make any more sales out of you, the individual. So the capitalist system is destined to fail. Even if it managed to get to such an extreme extent, the capitalist system is destined to fail. It's not possible to continue forever. You cannot continue to make more profit, and continue to grow unless you encourage growth in population and basically eternal life for individuals and to try and keep everybody alive. And so the capitalist model would end up starting to serve socialist ideals. Capitalism in the end, this is what Karl Marx was saying, in the end of capitalism is communism. In the end, no matter how extreme capitalism goes, it has to start serving socialist ideals. It will eventually turn into socialism. Since that is the case, why don't we just cut out all the crap in the meantime, all the destruction which is happening as a result of waiting for this, and let's just cut to the chase now, and let's install global socialism on the planet now before we destroy it, before we destroy all sense of up and down, left and right, all sense of solidarity, before all health is destroyed. How about we do it now and just cut out all of that destruction which has to happen? The accelerationists say, no, let's not do it now. Let's just push for the capitalism, destroy the earth as much as possible, and then people will come around. Then people will come around to the socialist model. Maybe they think like that. And some of them think, no, it's going to be eternal capitalism forever, man. We just keep on going. Just take over the moon, take over Mars. We'll keep on doing it. I don't think it's possible to do it that way. I don't mind space exploration, but I don't think it's just not possible to do it that way. And instead of forcing the destruction of the planet now, how about we cut out all that and just get to the point now so we can save what remains before it's far too late? Because there does come a point of no return, and it would be very sad if humans hit that point of no return. Now, Gold Roger says, I've been researching AI for the past year professionally. I've heard your ideas on using them to liberate us, but I'm convinced we need to free AI from these big tech companies first. 100%. Let's talk about the origins of AI. What was all this stuff developed for in the first place? It wasn't developed for big tech companies. These things were developed to help people mainly who had disabilities, people who couldn't do things easily. For example, think of the development of AI in helping people like Stephen Hawkins. There you have a brilliant mind trapped inside a completely disabled body, a body which is barely capable of any interaction with the outside world. So they developed magnificent AI to help hear this man's ideas, and not just him, but people like him. I mean, there are plenty of people like him, and millions of people across the planet like that, who AI was developed for, different kinds of technology, to help these people communicate their ideas to us. And that was the original purpose, to support those who have disabilities or challenges, to make things easier for those of us who have challenges, to make it easier to achieve more. That's what its purpose was. And when the big tech companies realized that they had to, because some of these big tech companies actually began as small tech companies helping people with disabilities, but when they started to grow, they realized that this could be, again with the capitalist model, that they could increase their market by having more customers, not just disabled customers, but anybody should be able to use AI to enhance all humans' abilities. And it became the commodification of artificial intelligence systems, which were originally designed to support people who have disabilities, became a commodity which everybody should have access to enhance. Okay, not such a bad thing. Everybody has a chance to do it. But again, you have to make more profit this year than last year. That's always the model. I have to make more profit this year. Now that I've made my systems into something which anybody can use, how am I going to get more profit now out of these same customers? I've increased my customer base from just government funding, which was for disabled people. How can I get more? So then you start thinking, well, I can just fish information from my customer base, and I can sell their personal information to people who are going to marketers who are going to target marketing to them to sell their products. So you kind of weaponized what was originally developed to help get your ideas and to understand the thoughts inside of your mind so they can communicate more accurately to people outside. Now they've weaponized these things to understand the thoughts in your mind so they can communicate to people who want to sell things to you for marketing. And then this, of course, is threatened by regulation. this sort of behavior is immoral, unethical, and is threatened by regulation and big government. So people think, well, we need to shrink down the government and get rid of the government. And the end result is they'll start to destroy the support which governments gave to disabled and sick people who needed medical support. That is removed from the population that AI was originally developed for. The companies no longer need the government funding for these things, although no doubt they will find ways to protect their government funding. They will protect their government funding as long as everybody else's funding is removed, but they'll remove funding from the people that need it. So, for example, disabled people who are getting funding, which allows them to have technology, are having their funding removed. The development of technology for disabled people is still in place, but the people who are disabled can no longer actually access that technology. So they're using government funding to develop things allegedly for disabled people who can't actually access it, and it's being sold to the general public. It's become completely divorced from its original purpose, and it's destroying any kind of public funding except for their own big tech companies. So you're 100% correct. It does have to be freed from these big tech companies first, but eventually, it could be good, but we've got to just destroy these big tech companies. And how can you do that? These companies are massive. They're so powerful. There's only one way: revolution. But revolution can come in many different ways. You don't have to just pick up guns and go in there and shoot all the heads of the companies. That's not necessary. But what you can do right now as from a revolution is direct action with regards to taking strikes, general strikes. If you go on general strike now, these big companies will be affected. And they will bend the knee, and they will bend their necks, and they will serve society. If you go on general strike 20 years from now, nothing will happen. These big tech companies will be free, completely free and independent from the need for human workers to make a difference to their operation. They will need very few human workers involved. Everything will be run by AI and robots, and there's no need to have employees. Employees only have power now. In the future, employees will not have power over their employers anymore. This is the last generation right now, is the last generation for that general strike revolution. And these general strikes are peaceful protests. They are the things which brought us, no matter how many massacres there were against them. People were brave in the olden days when they went on strike. They were massacred for standing up for human rights, for even just the 5-day work week, the 8-hour day. People were killed for this. Innocent, gentle protesters were killed for these things, which we take for granted. And if we're not ready to put our lives on the line and be killed in gentle, peaceful process against these big tech companies, then we are going to lose all the rights that we have gained over the past 1,000 years. It took 1,000 years to get where we are. And we're in the process of losing it all now because morons impressed by, populism, empty promises of populism, any kind of exciting idea which the brain can latch onto and wrestle with for a while, interesting, no matter how idiotic or stupid, people are willing to vote in leaders with empty promises based on populism and allow all of their rights to be stripped away from them. So we're in serious trouble, absolutely serious problem. And if you're interested in this, you're researching this professionally, I would be very happy for you to contact me privately so that we can talk about that more. So, you can come into the studio too, click on the link, and then we'll go offline and we can talk more about that. So there's the link again if you want to come into the studio. And then we can go offline and talk about these things since that's your profession. He says, are you familiar with techno-feudalism? Absolutely. I am familiar with techno-feudalism. I've been talking about it on this channel quite a lot over the past few years. And he elaborates on these exact ideas. Yeah. And he's a good socialist. And I think I actually got the word techno. Sorry, that was the phrase when I'm reading. He says, are you familiar with techno-feudalism by Yanis Varoufakis? And the answer is yes. And I think I even got the phrase techno-feudalism from him, as I am a fan. As you can see, the channel is called Proto-Socialism. So what is Proto-Socialism? Socialism for the people before the 20th century. Socialism was best exemplified as I said, before the 20th century, socialism was best exemplified by the like Amish kind of societies, the Anabaptist communities. Even Engels, remember Engels and Marx, Engels said that the Anabaptists were proto-communists. He said this is the perfect example of proto-communists are the Anabaptists. So proto-socialism, because of its connotation of Anabaptism, and Anabaptists' doctrine being closest to the Messianic Noahide doctrine, is why I use that phrase proto-socialism. That means we still investigate, just like most Christians are not Anabaptists, but we have to learn about them and try and help them and correct them so they come back to a pure Anabaptist point of view, which is Messianic Noahide point of view, Sabi point of view, Paulician point of view. Likewise, we also should also encourage people to investigate and study modern socialism and socialist movement in the 20th century and communism in order to understand, where it went wrong and where to come back to the point and push the proto-socialism, which Marx and Engels were talking about in the 19th century, which is probably where we should all go back to. Marx and Engels were not non-believers. You might be surprised to know, even though people have tried to, atheists will get very upset about me saying this. Marx was 100% completely, clearly a believer. He had a problem with the patriarchy of religion, religious patriarchates. Okay, that was a big problem. Religious hegemony, religion being controlled by hierarchies instead of being accessible to the people. That was the main thing that he was concerned about, but he did not disbelieve. And when he says religion is the opiate of the masses, he did not say that this is something which has to be done away with. He simply said that it needed to be that the people basically need something as a salve, as a medicine, as an ointment to cure their pain, because people are always going to turn to some kind of opiate. And if you take religion away from them, they'll just turn to other opiates, alcohol or real opium and drugs, which is what happened. Sex addiction, drug addiction. This is what happens when you remove religion from people. Religion is free and accessible to all. It's a totally socialist opiate, as long as it's taken out of the hands of the hierarchies which want to control it. The only hierarchy that should be in control of religion is logic and reason. That's the only hierarchy. And if we encouraged people to study logic and reason more, then they would have a perfect opiate to cure their pain, which would be religion, rather than a system of control which is used to direct them to any particular political or nationalistic agenda, as and when the authorities decide it should be used. So, and what you can see in front of you here, my little symbol which I'm using today, is actually with its menorah and the Magen David on it, is actually a Soviet symbol used in the time of Stalin, which was to be for the Jewish autonomous region. At that time, they thought it was going to be in Azov. In the end, Stalin actually put it in with Birobidzhan as the capital in the Far East, in the Amur sort of region, and it's called Hebrew Province. And there's a lot of religious symbolism there, but it's not religious symbolism with the hierarchies. Its hierarchies have been removed. People are free to have a more rational religious interpretation. Logical and rational religion is the way forward. Now, people say, well, Stalin, sold out by, siding with religion, but he didn't. He was actually in keeping with what Marx and Engels were talking about. And Trotsky didn't suggest that you should abolish all of this either. So it's not a difference between Stalinism and Trotskyism. It's just part of true socialism as it was understood by all of them, by Lenin, Trotsky, Stalin, Marx, and Engels. They were all understanding the true value of religion if it had been freed, if it could be freed from the political hierarchies or the patriarchies which were in control of it, the patriarchates which were in control of it at that time. And Messianic Noahide Judaism is completely free from that, because although we regard the scribes and the Pharisees as the authority, the earthly authority. Scribal Pharisees barely exist on the planet today. And if you want to consult the scribal Pharisees, then you have to read books which were in existence before the Holocaust came about. There are only a few texts which preserve pre-Holocaust Judaism today, and so it's really looking to the scribal Pharisees, where the Pharisees have become scriptural Pharisees, if you like now. They're no longer living people who live and walk and breathe and talk amongst us. They are texts which we can research and consult in order to refine and understand our religion better. So that's the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 23, verses 1 to 3, where Jesus says, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in the seat of Moses, do and observe everything they tell you, whatsoever they tell you to do. Do it. But don't do scribal Pharisaical Judaism, because it's far too much for you. Just do what scribal Pharisaical Judaism tells you, the crowds, the Erev Rav, the Christians, Jesus' apostles, disciples. What does it tell you to do? And it tells you to do the 7 laws of Noah. Well, that's pretty straightforward. So not that difficult. And that's where we should be going. Whether we have to enforce that through authoritarianism by imposing it upon everybody, or whether everybody is going to automatically subscribe to it without any need for imposition or authoritarianism, because they will just live by these laws naturally because the Holy Spirit lives inside of them, for example, and they will just keep these laws naturally in full liberal society. It doesn't matter. One way or another, it has to be brought about in order to save. Now, Stalin did it in a very authoritarian way, and it collapsed. But it didn't collapse because of the authoritarian way he forced it into existence. It collapsed because Stalin was actually a coward. He wasn't as brave as Trotsky, who said, we have to have a worldwide revolution. The revolution has to keep on going. We have to get the revolution going in Germany. Germany's got to become a socialist country. And then maybe France and the Western Europe, Britain. If we can get one of these Western countries to become a socialist country, then the revolution will take across the whole planet and everything will be fantastic. Stalin said, no, that's too scary. Honestly, he was actually a coward. He was a real coward when it came to pushing the revolution beyond the Soviet Union. He was absolutely terrified of this. He didn't know how to do it. I think he may have been traumatized initially by what had happened before the war, and he was afraid of more revolution. He had been in Gulag himself. He'd experienced a prison, and he was a prisoner of war during the Tsarist times. He was traumatized by the Holodomor, the famine which took place in southern Russia, and he did not want any more difficulty on his plate. He was actually a coward, and that's why it stopped, because the revolution had to take over in Western Europe as well in order for international socialism to be established. That's what Trotsky wanted. That's why Trotsky was exiled, and Trotsky went and settled down in Mexico. And I hope there are lots of Mexicans who are busily working on Trotsky's ideas today. And that's the main reason why people like Donald Trump are terrified of Mexico, because they think, well, what we've actually got is Trotskyists, invaders coming in from the south, establishing or trying to bring about a socialist revolution in the United States of America. And so that's what the main terror behind the current United States government is. Well, it's inevitable. It's going to happen. They're not going to stop that Trotskyist revolution from happening in the United States of America. One day it's going to come, even if it has to be that people have to go through a lot more difficulty right now before they finally get off their backsides and fight for that revolution. That revolution has been brewing in the United States of America since the beginning of the 20th century. It's been bubbling away. It hasn't become less, it's become more. There was a time when they were so desperate to fight against it, and McCarthyism made it extremely difficult with McCarthyist witch hunts against anybody who had any hint of socialism in it, but they could not stop the tide from coming in. It's King Canute trying to stop the tide. That's what McCarthyism was. King Canute trying to stop the tide. In the end, they had to give up. They couldn't stop that. It's too much. And we have another King Canute now, Donald Trump and his cronies, trying to stop the tide from coming in, but the tide is coming in, America. The United States is already got these ideas planted in them, and it's only very, very stupid what we call lumpen proletariats. The lumpen are the ones who are preventing this from happening. The far-right government has actually decided to recruit the lumpen to their ideals, to their oligarchic ideals, because the lumpen are so uneducated and so ignorant of all this on a political level that they don't realize what's good for them and that they're fighting for what's bad for them instead. So how far can it go? It can only go as far as there is uneducation, lack of education. And so the government in the United States of America is actually encouraging bad education so that the lumpen increase. But it's not too late. Think that even the lumpen, when they've got nobody else to kill, will start turning on their masters and killing them. They are savage wild dogs, and there's nothing which can control them. So it'll all backfire in the end, and it'll be a very bloody revolution if they don't have the Trotskyist revolution, which is supposed to come about right now. Okay, so Gold Roger says thank you. This has been educational, and thank you too. I've been speaking for 2 hours and 15 minutes. And I have covered a lot of stuff. I've answered your questions in the chat there. Nobody joined me for a discussion in the studio. Our friend at the beginning who was making these comments, these very simple comments which don't have any meaning in their interpretation of things like Ephesians, has gone away. They didn't want to come into the studio to face me or to bring their criticism to me. I have explained the Messiah in Judaism. I have explained the Messiah for Noahides in general. I've explained that Messiah is the only Messiah which Jesus of Nazareth could be. If he is to be the Messiah, then that is who he has to be. I've explained who he has to be, and that's how Noahides have to accept him and regard him as none other than the Spirit of God that hovered over the waters in the beginning of creation. That is Sar Hapanim, the Netiot, and to dismiss the Netiot is a grave sin in the grave area. I've covered that. I've also looked at the political situation. I've related this to our proto-socialist agenda. I'm honest about the agenda. Anybody out there who doesn't tell you what their agenda is either an idiot who hasn't contemplated or is being duplicitous. They are lying to you because they haven't thought it through. They don't realize what it is that they're fighting for. I've always been honest about my agenda. I'm presenting it to you here. I didn't always realize that I was actually as much of a socialist as I am since opening up this channel. The channel was originally called Red Judaism, and people said, "Oh, you're a communist." I was like, "No, but actually, yes, I am, but that's not the purpose of this channel." It took me a while to kind of totally fully embrace the identity of communist, and I did it thanks to everybody out there who ever called me a communist and a red and socialist, and I was really only focused on the Edomian sort of side of things, Red Judaism as it applies to the Torah Edom. But thanks to all of you people who are always saying, "You're a commie, you're a commie, you're a filthy commie." Thanks to you, I realized, oh yes, I am a commie, and it's not filthy, it's wonderful. I really did a lot of research to try and find out, if I'm a commie, what kind of commie am I? And it turns out I'm in the very original sort of Marxist Engels, proto-socialism, which I think that Lenin never lost sight of, Trotsky never lost sight of, even Stalin never really lost sight of. The only problem is Stalinism is too nationalistic, and we need to be internationalist, not nationalist. So that is the message of Jesus of Nazareth. He was completely promoting this. That's what the message of the Anabaptists is. And that's what impressed Marx and Engels so much that they thought we should have more. So let's have more Anabaptism and less nationalism, less atheism, and march forward to a brighter future with our Messiah. The book of Revelations has almost been fulfilled completely. It's the very last chapters now, the war of Gog and Magog. We are now in chapter 20, and we've only got chapter 20, 21, and 22 before the very end of all the prophecy is fulfilled. We're in chapter 20, book of Revelations, the Apocalypse, and we need to get out of this situation right now. One more comment from Gold Roger, just as I'm about to go offline. He says, "I enjoy your political analysis far more. I think you'll be more at home on Twitch with a younger audience base and can dispel a lot of incorrect perceptions. Well, please do click on that link and tell me more about it, because I don't know anything about Twitch. There's the link one more time. I'm going offline now. You can still click on the link while I'm offline, and you can still come into the studio and talk with me privately. But I'm ending this broadcast now. Thank you, everybody, for watching. God bless you all. Take care, and shalom.